Namasarvebhyah. In this video, we will learn about all the rules of Visarga Sandhi in Sanskrit grammar. Visargaha, an important letter of the Sanskrit alphabet, also classified under the category of Ayogavahaha. It can only appear after a swara and it has its own distinct pronunciation, which can usually be heard at the end of a word, especially when there is a minor pause and avasana after the visarga. For instance, Ramaha. However, when there is no avasana after the visarga, then one usually ends up pronouncing some other sounds instead of the visarga, like O as in Ramo Gacchati, R as in Munirvadati, Sa as in Sadhustapati, and so on. This process, by which a new sound gets heard instead of the visarga, is commonly referred as Visarga Sandhi, and it is of 8 types as per the ancient book of phonetics, the Paniniya Shiksha. This book says, Obhavascha vivrittischa shashasa repha evacha jivhamulamupadhma cha gatirashta vidhoshmanaha. The verse enumerates 8 types of sounds that can be heard instead of the visarga. Obhavaha, the sound O. Vivruttihi, disappearance of the visarga, also known as lopa. Shashasa repha evacha, the sounds sh, sh, sa, and ra. And the last two, the special sounds Jivhamuliya, a distinct sound produced from the back of the tongue, and Upadhmaniya, a sound blown from the mouth. While in strict Paninian terms, this is not the precise way how the prakriya takes place, still, from the phonetic point of view, these are the exact sounds that it finally leads to. So it is perfectly natural to capture all these under the common title of Visarga Sandhi for all practical purposes. And in order to understand the exact circumstances required for these transformations, we need to learn a few rules of Visarga Sandhi. But before that, here is a quick reminder on the 3 important groups of letters of Sanskrit language. The Swaraha, representing all the vowels. The Mrudu Vyanjanani, the soft consonants consisting of Varga Tritiya, Varga Chaturtha, Varga Panchama, Antastha, and the Hakara. And the Karkasha Vyanjanani, which consist of all other consonants. These 3 classes play a very vital role in Visarga Sandhi. Another point to remember is that there are some special cases where the rules are slightly complex and hence it is better to simply remember the final form. For example, ahaha ahaha becomes aharahaha. Bhratuhu putraha becomes bhratush putraha. Chatuhu konaha becomes chatush konaha. Duhukrutyam becomes dushkrutyam. In the same way, namaskaroti, puraskaraha, ahishkrutam, nishkamam, and so on. There are a few more words in this category, but this is sufficient for now. Keeping these handful of special forms aside, most of the other examples of Visarga Sandhi can then be systematically captured using a set of 10 primary rules, which we will discuss now. It is important to note that these rules must always be tried out in the given sequence only till we get a match, and that's where we should stop. The first rule: the visarga at the end of saha and eshaha is always removed when followed by anything other than a raswa akara. For instance, saha asit becomes sa asit, esha atma becomes esha atma, saha unnataha becomes sa unnataha, esha eva becomes esha eva. Saha tarati becomes satarati. Eshaha gacchati becomes esha gacchati, and so on. The second rule: if there is a sanyoga, a conjunct letter after the visarga, and if the first letter of this sanyoga is a karkasha vyanjana and the second letter is one of sha, sh, or sa, then the visarga just remains as a visarga even after doing the sandhi. For example, in Ramaha Kshatriyaha, the letter Ksha is a sanyoga whose first member is Ka, a Karkasha Vyanjana, and the second member is Sh. Hence, the Visarga remains as a Visarga even after the Sandhi is done. Similarly, Kaha Saruhu, Payaha Kshiram, Adbhihi Psatam are a few more examples where the Visarga remains unchanged. The third rule: if there is a sanyoga after the visarga, but the order of the letters in this sanyoga is exactly opposite to that of the previous rule, that is, the first member of the sanyoga is one of sha, sh, or sa, and the second member is a karkasha vyanjana, then we have three different choices. We can remove the visarga, we can convert it to the first letter of the sanyoga, or we can even decide to keep the visarga unchanged even after doing the sandhi. For instance, in manaha sthitihi, there is a sanyoga after the visarga. The first letter of this sanyoga is sa and the second letter is tha, which is a karkasha vyanjana. Hence, we can apply the current rule and we can either remove the visarga altogether, giving manasthitihi, or we can replace the visarga by the first letter of the sanyoga, namely sa, giving manasthitihi, a form with two sakaras. Or, as a third option, we can just keep the visarga unchanged even after doing the sandhi, giving the form manahasthitihi. In the same way, when the word Ramaha is combined with the word Shtivati, the visarga can either be removed, it can be converted to sh, or it can remain unchanged, giving three forms. Same holds for the third example, apahashchotanti. The fourth rule: if the letter after the visarga is a karkasha vyanjana, then the visarga can be converted to various forms depending on the exact letter. For example, if the letter after the visarga is k or kh, then the visarga optionally becomes jivhamuliya, like ramah karoti or sadhuk khadati. If the letter is ch or ch, then the visarga is converted to sh, as in devascharanti or unnataschhatraha. For t and th, the visarga is converted to sh. For instance, ramashtikate or varnashthakaraha. For t and th, the conversion is to a sakara, as in unnatastaruhu or spashtasthakaraha. If the letter after the visarga is p or ph, then the visarga is optionally converted to an upadmaniya. For instance, krishnaf paramaha or vrikshaf phalanti. Finally, if the letter is one of sh, sh, or s, then the visarga is optionally converted to the corresponding letter, like munishete, sadhushashtha, or sarpasarati. The fifth rule: it is about the words bhoho, bhagoho, and aghoho, which are used in the context of a sambodhana. The visarga at the end of these words is always removed when followed by a swara or a mrudu vyanjana. The examples for swara are bhoho atra becoming bho atra, bhagoho ete becoming bhago ete, and aghoho ayam becoming agho ayam. The examples for mrudu vyanjana are bhoho janaha becoming bho janaha, bhagoho devaha becoming bhago devaha, and aghoho rakshasaha becoming agho rakshasaha. The sixth rule: when followed by the letter R, the visarga at the end of certain words is removed and the swara before such a visarga becomes dirgha if it was not dirgha already. These set of words include avyayas ending in a visarga. For instance, punaha, antaha, prataha, and so on. Therefore, punaha ramate becomes punaramate. The visarga at the end of punaha has been removed and the a before the visarga has been converted to a. Similarly, antaharashtriyaha becomes antarashtriyaha and not antarrashtriyaha as one might incorrectly assume. The next category of the words for this rule is the Sambodhana Ekvachana forms of the Rukaranta words like Pittaha, Mataha, Bhrataha, and so on. For example, Pittaha Raksha becomes Pita Raksha. The Visarga has been removed and the A has been converted to A. Similarly, Mataha Ramaswa becomes Mata Ramaswa. The final set of words for this rule are the words where Visarga occurs after any swara other than A or A. For instance, Kavihi, Lakshmihi, Sadhuhu, and so on. A few examples here are Kavihi Rajate becoming Kavi Rajate, where the Visarga has been removed and the Ikara before the Visarga has been converted to Dirgha Ikara. Similarly, Matuhu Rachana becomes Matu Rachana, Taihi Rakshitam becomes Tai Rakshitam. Observe that in this last example, there is no need to do the dirgha because the swara is already dirgha. The seventh rule. This is technically an extension of the previous rule as it is applicable for the same set of words. When followed by a swara or a mrudu vyanjana other than ra, the visarga at the end of these words is converted to ra. For instance, Punaratra Antaratma Nirgachati Pitareva Matarvada Kavirayam Gurureva Gauryati and so on. The eighth rule. It is about the visarga occurring after the letter A. Such a visarga gets removed when it is followed by a swara or a mrudu vyanjana. The examples for the swara are Balaha Atra becoming Bala Atra, Devaha Asan becoming Deva Asan, Chandramaha Udeti becoming Chandrama Udeti. The examples for the Mrudu Vyanjana are Chhatraha Hasanti becoming Chhatra Hasanti, Putraha Ramante becoming Putra Ramante, Bhaktaha Namanti becoming Bhakta Namanti, and so on. The ninth rule. The Visarga that has A on the left and A on the right combines with both the akaras and produces a single okara usually written with an avagraha chinna. For instance, Ramaha atra becomes Ramotra, Shivaha aham becomes Shivoham, Saha avadat becomes Sovadat, Eshaha asti becomes Eshosti. It should be noted here that the avagraha symbol is just a writing convention. It is neither compulsory nor does it cause any difference in the pronunciation. And that brings us to the last 10th rule. The entire letter aha, which consists of the letter a followed by the visarga, is converted to just the akara. That is, the visarga lopa happens when followed by a swara, and this entire letter is converted to o when followed by a mrudu vyanjana. The examples of visarga lopa are Shivaha Asit becomes Shiva Asit. Yaha iti becomes Ya iti. The examples of Okaradesha are Chhatraha Gacchati becoming Chhatro Gacchati. Krishnaha Yati converting to Krishno Yati. Ramaha Rakshati becoming Ramo Rakshati. And Devaha Rajate becoming Devo Rajate. One thing to note here is that this rule is not applicable when the visarga is followed by akara, because that case was already covered in the previous rule. And that's where we complete the 10 rules of Visarga Sandhi. It is important to remember that these rules must be applied in sequence only, and we must stop as soon as a matching rule is found. All these 8 rules, when applied properly, essentially capture all the important cases of Visarga Sandhi and give a total of 8 transformations as mentioned in the Paniniya Shiksha. Let's do a final run over them. Obhavaha as in Ramosti, Lopaha as in Bala Ete, Shakaraha as in Devascharanti, Shakaraha as in Sadhushashtaha, Sakaraha as in Sarpasarati, Rephaha as in Munirgachati, Jivhamuliyaha as in Krishnah Khadati, and Upadhmaniyaha as in Taruf Patati. Finally, let's not forget that the Visarga Sandhi between the two words in a sentence is completely optional. For example, we can create a Sandhi and write forms such as Namo Narayanaya, Nama Ishwaraya, and so on. Or we can also choose to write them separately, like Namaha Narayanaya, Namaha Ishwaraya, and so on. There is nothing wrong with this approach. However, a point to note is that if we choose to do the Visarga Sandhi, then no other Sandhi can further be performed on its result. For instance, on doing the Visarga Lopa in Arjuna Uvacha, we would get Arjuna Uvacha. At this step, one might be tempted to do the Guna Sandhi to get even a smaller form like Arjunovacha, but that is not allowed. We cannot perform any further Sandhi on the result of the Visarga Sandhi, and thus Arjuna Uvacha is indeed the final form. Well, that's all for the Visarga Sandhi for now. Remember, the only way to master the Visarga Sandhi is to practice it regularly, and thus, henceforth, please make sure to consciously analyze the examples of Visarga Sandhi whenever you read any Sanskrit stories, articles, or write ups. And before we conclude, here is a pop quiz for all our viewers. What is the result of doing the Visarga Sandhi on the following sentence? Bhoho Naha Raksha. In order to answer this and a few other similar questions that would test your understanding of Visarga Sandhi, please make sure to attempt a small quiz whose link is available in the description below. That's all for today, and we will be soon back with yet another such video on Sanskrit grammar. Till then, Shubham Bhuya.